Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, the first part thereof for the 21st of October 2025. I have quite a lot to go through today actually. There's a few bits and bobs that I think are worthy of note. I have also got quite a large video on negotiations to do next as a follow-on from yesterday's analysis of meetings and whatnot, so check that out as well, and all the videos I didn't get out yesterday. Goodness me, there's a lot of content, a lot of stuff going on around the world, not much of it good. Okay, let's start with the Ukrainian General Staff figures and some huge numbers here comparatively speaking. So we have 1,130 personnel lost, so that's significant. Something's happened yesterday. 8 tanks, okay, that's the biggest number of tanks I've seen for a long time. 37 armoured combat vehicles is huge. That's well over the daily average, and we haven't seen those numbers for an awful long time. Okay, so there was definitely, there had to have been some mechanised attacks taking place yesterday that led to the loss of significant personnel and materiel. Of course, that doesn't mean that the Russians didn't take ground. This is how they work, isn't it? Just overwhelming the defences and sacrificing material and personnel to the gods of war, taking a tree line here, a building there. So Pokrovsk is looking very hairy at the moment. There is fighting, intense fighting going on in the buildings, in the streets of Pokrovsk. But there have also been some attacks. We know that these figures are justified by video footage that is coming out, particularly along the southern line, Zaporizhzhia. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. 23 artillery systems, again, fairly significant number in that category, and 134 automotive and fuel tanks. So they've now changed that translation. It was vehicles and fuel tanks. They've changed it to automotive and fuel tanks. I don't know if that's relevant at all, but basically your motorcycles and your SUVs, bukankas, all sorts of things like that. Okay, so before we get to material losses, we always start with personnel. So we're going to go to the Institute for the Study of War. Thanks, Johnny Johns, for sending this one on to me. A key takeaway from a report they've done, the report is warning the Kremlin is preparing to mobilize reservists on a rolling basis to fight in Ukraine for the first time. So key takeaway, Russia may begin to mobilize members of Russia's active reserve on a rolling basis to sustain its combat operations in Ukraine, but is unlikely to conduct a large-scale involuntary reserve mobilization to expand the size of the Russian military dramatically at this time. The creation, so essentially what Russia is doing is similar to what Ukraine is doing in a way, in that they're trying to look for ways to mobilize people without doing a national, across the board, involuntary mobilization. They did that, if you remember, was it September 2022? It was deeply unpopular, but it did get them a lot of troops. They need to do that, but the Kremlin knows that if they do that, they are going to be suffering hugely economically, because they'll be taking a large amount of people outside of the economy. You will also see a lot of people run away. This is what happened previously. Loads of people fled to try and escape mobilization abroad. So you lose them, and they will be leaving the economy as well, the workforce. But also it's deeply politically unpopular. It is not a popular move. And they know that previously there were lots of protests when they had the mobilization. Obviously they could quash them, and they could quash them again at the moment. But, things are not looking good in Russia. The economy is starting to creak and crack, and a full national mobilization would be it's the last chance saloon, really, if they do that. The creation of a mechanism for, so in other words, they need to do things, and Ukraine knows this as well. They've got a big black hole in their demographic graph in the 18 to 25 cohorts, and they know if they those are the groups they really want to take from to get young, fit fighters. But if they do that, then they don't have people learning the trades to get jobs, to have skills to add to the workforce after a war, or even during the war. They also are taking the people away from that, the set of the cohorts of population most likely to have children, and so they've got the lowest they've got the highest mortality rates, lowest infancy rates. So you take from that group there, you are screwing yourselves, and that's a dilemma Ukraine is in. So they're trying to get people from prisons. They copied what the Russians did, except improved on it in terms of the way that they morally carried that out. But they are doing that. They've taken some, 11,000 people at least now have come from the prison service, or not from the prison service, from prisons. They're also trying to get foreign volunteers as well. Different corps, different units are trying to set up their own foreign legion, if you like, equivalents at the unit level. And then trying to get people to join voluntarily without going through a full mobilization, the Russians too. So the creation of a mechanism for small rolling mobilizations would be a major inflection in Russia's fourth generation strategy, which so far has sought to generate recruits through growing financial incentives, so the carrots, and sign-up bonuses to avoid mass compulsory mobilization after the challenging involuntary reserve call-up of late 2022. As mentioned, the Russian Cabinet of Ministers Commission on Legislative Activity passed a new draft amendment that effectively removes the current legal barriers against deploying reservists to combat in the absence of an officially declared mobilization or war. So if there's no war officially called, which there isn't still, this is still a special military operation, you can't call reservists up to the front lines, I believe. And so they passed a new draft amendment that effectively removes that. Russia's existing pay-to-play system for generating recruits is likely hitting diminishing returns and is forcing the Kremlin to adopt a different approach using rolling compulsory mobilization of reservists to sustain its manpower in the face of continuing high casualty rate in Ukraine. This warning does not suggest that the Kremlin is likely to undertake a single large-scale mobilization at this time, but it does show. So over to me now. It does show that the Russians are taking huge losses. We talked about whether they were sustainable, looking at some figures the other day, and I would guess that at the moment their losses are unsustainable, and that is why they're being forced to do things like that. Now, Wiki then has a thread. Russian convicts are refusing en masse to join the army, according to the jailed Igor Strelkov, Evil Gherkin. In contrast to Yevgeny Prigozhin's recruitment campaigns in 2022 to 2023 that attracted tens of thousands of recruits, distrust of the army is now said to be universal. Gherkin, which is interesting in itself, right? Gherkin, who was jailed last year, is reportedly being held in the IK-5 penal colony in Kirovo-Chepetsk in the Kirov region. The facility specializes in holding ex-security officials. Gherkin is ex-FSB. As such, it might normally be expected to provide plenty of recruits for the army. The reality is very different, though, according to Gherkin. Interestingly, he says that the imprisonment of deserters is causing the wider prison population to become more aware of how the army treats its men and makes them more resistant to recruitment efforts. So it's interesting that deserters are getting imprisoned rather than sent to the front, or at least in some cases. Quote, just today, we were once again visited by recruiters from the Ministry of Defence, boldly lying that they were recruiting not for assault units but for rear and support units. Well, in our prison unit no one recruited, and in other units the situation is the same or close to that. In other words, even convicts in extremely dire circumstances do not want to go to the special military operation. This is primarily due to the general absolute distrust of the authorities, who appeal to convicts through recruiters. We have plenty of 337s, Article 337 of the Criminal Code, i.e. deserters here, each of whom can talk a lot, and does, about how many times, etc., they and their comrades were deceived by the Ministry of Defence. Not all of them, of course, but most of their stories, in my opinion and assessment, are entirely or partially credible. A dismissive attitude towards soldiers as renewable, cheap resources meet is a characteristic feature of command at almost all levels, from battalion commander and above. At the same time, many are willing to go and say they are ready to go when everyone else goes in the event of a mobilization, and they are even ready to fight, but none of them wants to voluntarily go to the slaughter. All the other factors cited by Kartavik, who are also present: the unclear goals of the war, the lousy, from the personal experience of those who fought sometimes quite extensively, supplies, support, and weapons, the lack of equality in hardships and deprivation between the fighting ordinary workers and the children of officials living in luxury in the rear, and so on. And the demand for justice, that too is there. But the complete distrust of the military authorities and the lack of understanding the goals of the war. I heard many statements from soldiers about its commercial nature, i.e. for the personal profit of corrupt commanders, are key. Wow, so they're still, 3.5 years later, they still don't really know why they're fighting the war. The people fighting still don't know. I've reported on this a number of times from anecdotes from Russian fighters. He finishes Strelkov. If there is no mobilization about which there are persistent rumors among convicts, then very soon, in fact already now, there will be no one to replenish the existing army. Now, it amazes me that he gets these statements out there, like he's still allowed to post somehow while in prison, and this is really denigrating of the armed services and the authorities. So yeah, well, there you go. It is I think what is to be expected. Russians really struggling to mobilise, trying to do rolling force mobilisation of reservists, changing the rules. Meanwhile, Igor Strelkov, Evil Gherkin, says that they're trying to recruit loads in prison, but people are not up for it. En masse, they're not up for it, as there are widespread accounts of how terrible the conditions are on the front lines from deserters in prison. Okay, then we're going to go to Ukraine now, and this is a long read in The Guardian, but well worth reading. And it gives you the story of a guy called Tim, is not his real name, I presume, a Chinese chap who's fighting for Ukraine. I wanted to do something more meaningful. The Chinese nationals fighting for Ukraine. Of course, the question is how many of these are there. So Tim, 43-year-old, was delivering aid on the outskirts of Kyiv when he heard a missile fly overhead. So he started by being a volunteer out in Ukraine helping. Like many Chinese volunteers, Tim is motivated by a combination of sympathy for the Ukrainian cause and increasing despair at the direction of his own country. Before he arrived in Ukraine, the only country he had visited outside China was Japan, but he considered emigrating for over a decade. Quote, 15 years ago, you could see problems, speak freely about them, and there would be people willing to discuss them, Tim said of China. But those days are gone, he feels. He learned about the war in Ukraine by using a virtual private network, VPN, connection to watch videos on YouTube, which is blocked in China. I don't read news from Chinese websites at all because the news there is all fake, he said. He went back and forth between Ukraine and China for a year, each time taking long and indirect routes that involved several stopovers, and gradually came to the conclusion that Ukraine had a bright future. Despite being at war, people were friendly to him as a foreigner. He started making plans for his wife and children to join him, and then the missile attack on the children's hospital spurred him to enlist in the army. Wow. Foreigners can serve in irregular Ukrainian army units or one of two dedicated international legions. Konstantin Milevsky, a Ukrainian military official, said in August that there are about 8,000 foreigners in the land forces, and perhaps double that figure across the military as a whole. Interesting. These are stats I want to know. The Ukrainian army does not release detailed breakdowns of the nationalities of international recruits, but many come from South America, drawn by salaries that exceed $3,000, so £2,244 a month, for the most dangerous missions. The basic income is closer to $500 a month. Chinese volunteers in Ukraine estimate that there are at most a few dozen people from mainland China serving in the army. So just a few dozen Chinese there, so not many. The Chinese public's views on Russia are complex. Some nationalists have never forgiven Tsarist Russia for annexing large swathes of territory from the Qing dynasty in the late 19th century, but the war in Ukraine has been accompanied in China by an aggressive propaganda push from state media, which blames the US for the crisis. So on and so forth. And then, as I say, it's a good long read there. He said, I'm nearly 40 and I've not voted once in my life. The government never listens to the voices of ordinary people. I don't want my kid to grow up in such an environment. Is this still Tim? So no, it could be a chap called Fan. Fan has not figured out how to bring the rest of his family to Ukraine, but returning to China could be dangerous. Chinese laws do not specifically forbid citizens from joining foreign armies unless it is a threat to Chinese national security, but many fear retribution. Another Chinese soldier in Ukraine who asked to be referred to by his call sign Brumko said China's national security police had questioned his family about him. Tim sees his time in Ukraine as being in service of many goals. Asked why he would risk his life for another country, he said the main aim was to make a new life for himself and his family in Europe. Secondly, I want to show the world that there are many Chinese people like me. I want the world not to give up on China, he said. Don't always associate China with negative things. In fact, there are many good people in China and many positive ideas. It's a really interesting statement there. And actually, I fall foul of doing this, with China's a country of 1 billion people. There's going to be a whole range of complex thinking in China and, moral dispositions and geopolitical positioning. Of course there will be, but sometimes we just oversimplify, don't we? Well, maybe you don't. I'm just I'll talk for myself then. Euromaidan press states Russian forces launched a large-scale assaults across 4 fronts in the south of Ukraine. So this is where we are seeing the large numbers of losses for the Russians. Russian assault groups advanced near Mala Tokmachka, Shebaki, Novodanilivka and Novoandriivka with 200 troops, 3 tanks and 15 armoured vehicles. Well, actually, it's more than that across a number of different attacks. So these are places not too far from each other, it must be said. So massive Russian assaults crushed near Mala Tokmachka, says no reports. On the Orikhiv front, around 2 companies from the 71st Motor Rifle Regiment advanced with 26 vehicles, including tanks, BMPs, BTRs and Tigers, those are mobility vehicles. Ukrainian forces had destroyed 2 tanks, 12 BMPs, 6 BTRs and 2 Tigers. The rest were wiped out. So I don't know what the difference between destroyed and wiped out, though, is. I wonder if that's just humans he's talking about. Anyway, countering the massive Russian attack on Zaporizhzhia front, there are plenty of videos to show this. So, this first one here, a big Russian attack with 26 armoured vehicles repelled today on the Zaporizhzhia front. Russian forces from the 71st Motorized Rifle Regiment attempted a mechanised assault on Mala Tokmachka. A total of 26 vehicles, including tanks, BMPs, BTRs and Tiger armoured vehicles. So you can see lots of imagery of these attacks with a large amount of mechanised equipment, far more than we have seen generally across the front. There have been a few spikes recently up in the Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka direction, been a few attacks up there. Now we're seeing these mechanised attacks in Zaporizhzhia. And I'm wondering whether these were, and there's another 2 minutes of video here, so there's a lot of stuff that you can watch here. I'm wondering, I'll just keep this on as kind of B-roll in the background while I'm speaking. I'm wondering whether what you are seeing is the culmination, or culmination, probably the wrong word, is the manifestation of the claims that they were amassing troops and equipment down in Zaporizhzhia. Then we heard this months and months ago. And alongside hearing that, we saw the Ukrainians strike deeper behind the lines or in the kind of near rear, but also back to Melitopol, Tokmak, the railways. All sorts of things were struck behind the lines, and I think that was the Ukrainians trying to stop these attacks from happening. I talked about that explicitly at the time, and I'm wondering if the Russians have now got to a point where they feel not confident enough, but they've got enough equipment to mount more significant attacks on the Zaporizhzhia front. And now you're seeing lots and lots of imagery of these attacks. So yeah, it could be that yesterday was the day they decided to finally come through with their attacks in the Zaporizhzhia direction. So again, lots of vehicles here, lots of troops, loads of strikes. It looks like there's artillery, as well as no doubt huge numbers of drones doing their things. And very accurate striking there. I won't show the rest of that because I might get in trouble. But you see the point. You see what's going on there. Rare footage here of the use of enemy equipment by mechanised assaults. The enemy tried to advance near Orikhiv. However, the FPV hit the armour and the driver lost control and overturned the equipment into a ditch. So that's the end of that piece of kit for the time being, at least. That's an incredible amount of white smoke coming out. It's almost like it's hit a smoke canister. And then, of course, it's a sitting duck, isn't it? As you see people getting out of it, and then they're hit as they're getting out. That is then taken out by successive drone strikes. Okay, then we have here an unsuccessful attempt by a Russian operator using a drone to wind a rope around the blades of a Ukrainian heavy bomber or heavy bombers that destroyed the column of enemy armoured vehicles heading towards Mala Tokmachka in the Zaporizhzhia direction. So here we have a bit of a drone fight taking place between Russian and Ukrainian drones as Ukrainian drones are striking the Russian equipment below. And you can see that Ukrainian drone there just about got away with it, but it's a fairly sizable hexacopter that was dropping those munitions on the Russian kit. So yeah, loads of stuff going on across the front line there. Russia lost 22 armoured vehicles in a single assault on Mala Tokmachka, 2 tanks, 12 IFVs and 6 APCs destroyed, but infiltrators are, and here's the point, are reaching Pokrovsk on foot, sheltering in basements. So where they are not succeeding in these massive attacks using conventional means and traditional combat assets, they are in other places like Pokrovsk getting there on foot, sometimes having to walk long distances, but Pokrovsk is suffering. Sheltering basements, ambushing troops. If enough accumulate, the retreat decision may be forced. That's in Pokrovsk. And then, as I've shown you, there's this footage of the huge strike in Mala Tokmachka. There's also this coming. Actually, what I want to show you is this before we get there. Now, this is quite incredible. I don't know exactly where this is. This might be the Mala Tokmachka area as part of that. This has been shared widely. Loads of people are showing this because it is quite incredible. You have the destruction of a vehicle and a lot of smoke. So it looks like the smoke canisters are going off on this vehicle, just like I showed you the one in the ditch. I wonder if it is that same vehicle in the ditch releasing all that smoke. No, there's also a vehicle on the road here. So you've got, oh no, it's not. So sorry, no, it's completely different. So there's smoke massively going off at the side of the road and on the other side of the road too. So both sides of the road, causing this to be a massive smoke-filled mess here. But you've got a vehicle that's the other side of the billowing smoke. And I mean, yeah, it's awful to show people crashing into stuff, humans and all that, but this is almost like cartoonish quality here. In a motorcycle drives into the vehicle because it can't see because of smoke. Then the next motorcycle comes along, drives into the vehicle as well, and then it just happens time and time again. That one just about misses, and then the others for the next 25 seconds, yeah, just drive through and repeatedly hit the vehicle. And it is a bit of a bit of mishap comedy here for the Russians as they repeatedly drive into the, sorry, it's buffering a little bit there, struggling. So at least 4 motorcycles drive into that same vehicle, and the one that just misses tails back round to see how they all are. But anyway, yeah, that is literally almost the fog of war taking place there. Now, then we have this story coming from Sumy. These are Ukrainians operating a howitzer position, and their position is exposed by Russian recon drones. After Russian recon exposed their howitzer position, troops from Ukraine's 225th, they're doing a wonderful job up there, one of their patches over there, while assault shot down 30 FPV drones that were attacking their position. At nightfall, while evacuating, a drone hit their Humvee, but their driver Zhadan switched vehicles and under fire towed out both a howitzer and the damaged truck, which is pretty incredible. So anyway, video footage there, fairly long, well, not that too long, 45-second video of these guys shooting down drone after drone that were aiming for their positions. I don't know exactly how they shot down all 30 drones, but that's pretty incredible. You can see just there's a guy at the edge of the woods firing at it. I wonder if we can catch that more closely. I have to take the sound off just in case. If I missed it, it's this guy. Is it just after this? Oh no, I missed it. It was back here. It's right at the beginning, was it? No, oh, I'm missing it all the time. Yeah, no, it was back here. Sorry about this. There it is. So this guy is shooting with, I don't quite know what, because it's like there's a yellow cloud. Yeah, I don't quite know. One would presume it's going to be some kind of shotgun. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Someone else can work that out for me, but he's taken down that drone really close to where he is. Very dangerous, isn't it? Well, it's war. Okay, now we're going to move to Crimea. So in this video, we have drone teams locating and striking a camouflage Voldi radar at Jankoy airfield. That's sort of northeast of the Crimean Peninsula. Now, the Valdai is an advanced counter-drone radar. On the 18th of October, fuel depot in Berdyansk was also struck, sparking fires. So this is Tim White saying, they say the latest Russian radar complex was hit, the Valdai. Its primary use is to detect and combat attack drones. Tonight could be interesting. In other words, you take that down, you'll have less ability to detect all those drones that coming night. But then, one has to wonder how it was unable to do its job on this particular drone. But anyway, this was supposedly a really good strike for the Ukrainians. Again, Crimea, they are having a bit of a field day, or have been, although it's gone a little bit quieter more recently, but they were having a field day with equipment there. Can't tell what the battle damage we can't give it a proper battle damage assessment. Who knows what the actual damage to that was. Right, okay, then we are going to go to another Crusoe wiki thread. The constant presence of drones. So it goes back to this bit of footage we saw in, I think, Sumy, to give us an idea of what it's like shooting down 30 drones attacking you in a howitzer encampment. The constant presence of drones has fundamentally changed the nature of war in Ukraine, according to Russian war blogger Alexander Karchenko. The only way to survive is to stay underground, and it can take days to travel just a few kilometers. On his Telegram channel, Witness of Bayraktar, Karchenko writes, quote, "Movement is life. In a special military operation, this axiom has taken on new meaning. Just a year ago, you could zip into Novohorodivka on a motorcycle and be out before sunset. Now, such a scenario resembles a Hollywood blockbuster about tough guys. In real life, the brave and courageous move from one shelter to another. It can take a week to walk 10 kilometers. Drones are ever more numerous, and foliage is ever thinner. Of course, going into autumn and winter, you are going to get less and less camouflage from the environment. The only way to hide is underground. This scenario significantly changes the traditional understanding of combat. So imagine now, you can't go up to, go to the toilet at all. That then becomes a life-threatening thing to do. This scenario significantly changes the traditional understanding of combat. Renowned tactical medical instructors force trainees to drag heavy dummies for kilometers while firing blanks over their heads. It's good training, but on the battlefield, everything is completely different. In the most dangerous areas, evacuation is out of the question. If you're wounded, the only way to survive is to find cover and wait for the front to advance. 4 healthy men won't be sent to pick up a wounded man. Firstly, because more than 2 people close together are a fat target. Secondly, it's simply impossible to escape a drone with such a payload. Gunfights are becoming less common. If the enemy is spotted, they'll be destroyed by artillery and drones. Now reaching a strong point or basement is already a victory. That's because getting there is more dangerous than engaging in gunfire. We're moving headlong toward unmanned warfare. Humans have reached the limits of their physical capabilities. The body can't be divided into 2 parts without consequences. Humans won't be smaller or more maneuverable. All hope lies in the development of unmanned technologies. Only they will ensure progress." Wow. I mean, that is a really frank assessment of the reality of this war. You can't move anywhere. I mean, places like Pokrovsk are going to be a much better, I presume, hope for troops as they're going from basement to basement, but still drones are going to be flying around there 10 a penny. This is a drone war now. It really is. And in fact, let's take that further on here. So the Ukrainian Navy have produced this Barracuda naval drone video delivering FPVs from its hull to strike on a Russian boat. So the Navy says its Barracuda is deploying FPV drones for a surprise attack on a Russian boat. Here, the strike destroyed the enemy crew and ammunition, the report said, all without risk to Ukrainian personnel. And that's the point. Send your USVs in with UAVs on top. You can talk about doing that down in Tuapse and Novorossiysk, but you can also talk about doing it much closer to home in the Kherson area in the Dnipro River Delta. Pilot your boat there, release some FPVs, destroy the enemy. Right, and then just thought I'd show you this picture, and it's a pretty decent picture because it gives us a real understanding of what these F-16s are carrying. So this is a Ukrainian F-16 armed with AIM-120 and AIM-9X. Those are air-to-air missiles, as well as the AIM-9X are the ones used in a NASAMS air defense system in the ground attack mode, or the ground-to-air, surface-to-air missile. but it's actually an air-to-air missile originally, as well as 8 GBU-39 precision-guided bombs. So to have precision-guided bombs on there to that number, just trying to work out, because they all look different. I can't see 8 of the same thing. GBU-39, I don't know if there are 8 39s on there. Unless 1, 2, 3... Are they the same? No, I don't know. Anyway, they might be different types of GBUs, but this is racked with quite a lot of armaments. I presume these are fuel tanks below there, and you've got 2, 3, maybe 4, 5, maybe 10 tops there, which would go to AIM 120, AIM 9X, and 8. I mean, yeah, that would suggest 10, but I don't know. At least. Okay, moving on to strikes last night, and the Russians sent 104 missiles and drones into Ukrainian airspace. Ukrainians only shot down 58 drones. No missiles were shot down. They sent 2 ballistic KN-23 or similar, so the North Korean or Iskander-M, whichever one they are. 2 of those were sent, and then 4 S-300s. Those are surface-to-air missile systems using ground attack mode, so they're effectively ballistic missiles. So 6 missiles were not shot down, and then you had 100 attack drones, give or take, almost 100, 98. 3 were still flying, so out of 95, just 58 were stopped, which is a 61% interception rate, which is poor. That is not good. So there you have what? That's 37 drones. No, yes it is. That's 37 drones. Maybe another 3 more. So somewhere between 37 and 40 drones. That getting through, that is not good enough. So although the Ukrainians are using way more, like a greater range of methods to shoot these drones down, and they're producing their own interceptor drones, the interceptor drones are having great success. Evidently, there's not enough success. Now, is this because these drones are being used much closer to the front line, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, Konstantinivka, Pokrovsk, that kind of area? Or, are there other variables at play here that, the Ukrainian interception rates are not good enough? Now, this is not good enough because energy, it's not a criticism. It's not good enough for Ukraine if they want their energy systems or networks and their industrial military complex to survive over the winter. To have 37 drones get through it just in one night, that's horrific. And it turns out that the Russians are now taking the attack on the energy infrastructure on a region by region basis, which means they're focusing on regions rather than the whole of Ukraine, which means they can much better overcome the Ukrainian air defenses. To be fair, that's exactly what I've been suggesting both sides should have been doing for the entirety of the war. I never understood why they'd send a couple hundred drones right across Ukraine or right across Russia, unless it's to find out where the gaps in the air defense is. But you do that initially, and then once you find out where the gaps in the air defenses are, you send all your drones to one region. That's how I would do it. Or just to one place. Take an airbase and just completely destroy the airbase. Take a power plant, take a whatever it is, a refinery, and completely destroy that. Just like all 100 drones against this one place. And then that one place ceases to exist. And it looks like that's what the Russians are doing more of at the moment. Ukrainian media report that Kharkiv is currently under heavy shelling. 4 aerial bombs have already hit the thermal power plant there. So that was last night, Tim White. Now, War Translated. Kharkiv was under a lot of pressure, and you're starting to see aerial guided glide bombs being used across the border, and there was talk yesterday from one of the Ukrainian officials that they are now developing, the Russians, a 200-kilometer guided glide bomb. These are effectively doing the job of cruise missiles. That is really what they are. And we talk about, with these stats every night, we say, oh look, 6 missiles were sent. Okay, that's not much. Yeah, but if 200 guided glide bombs are being sent, right, add 200 onto that. Massive challenge. Okay, yesterday, just after I finished recording yesterday, news came out that a DTEC enrichment plant in Dnipropetrovsk region was hit. I think I may have reported this, but I didn't focus on it This is a 6th large-scale attack on the enemy by the enemy on DTEC coal enterprises in the last 2 months. So they are going for Ukraine's ability to generate energy and to also make money out of coal. This is a huge challenge to the Ukrainians, and it's an example of the continued assault on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. This was, I think, a bad strike there on this particular facility. 4 air bombs fell on the thermal power plant in Kharkiv. Loud explosions could be heard, according to monitoring channels. There's a blackout in Chernihiv region after a Russian attack there, and they're without electricity in Chernihiv, Koryukivsky, Novgorod-Seversky and districts, and Slavutich in the Kiev region. So lots of struggle there with energy. And then Tim White adds, aerial or guided glide bombs are incredibly difficult to shoot down. They're virtually invisible to radar. So a couple of pieces of concerning news from Poltava this morning. For the first time, and this was yesterday, so this is yesterday morning, Russia hit the region with 1 launch from the occupied part of Kharkiv region. In other words, like, the guided glide bombs are increasing in their range significantly. And it's become clear Poltava was hit for the first time by aerial bombs launched from Belgorod. Regular guided glide bombs can only travel less than 100 kilometers, but this is much further, meaning the missiles were 2 of the Grom E1 bombs. If Russia is able to mass produce these, it's bad news. So not good news for the Ukrainians. Following a Russian strike on Kharkiv, 11 people have been reported as injured. As we heard, thermal power plant being struck there. Lots of civilian infrastructure also suffering too. But yeah, it was heavy shelling last night in Kharkiv. Chernihiv here without electricity, a heating facility and a power facility in the 2 communities were hit by shaheds in Chernihiv. Kharkiv was also hit by those guided glide bombs as mentioned. So again, energy. Massive air attack was witnessed going the other way though as well, apparently. Although we don't have huge amounts of detail coming out from Russia, but supposedly a massive air attack. Drone Bomber had a map showing quite a few drones flying in a number of directions, particularly actually into the area to the east of Melitopol. Mariupol, into Taganrog, Rostov on Don sort of area. Okay, so drones attack Russia's Bryansk up just on the north of Ukraine's border, and Rostov Oblast, causing damage, injuring 2, according to authorities. Drone attacks against Russia overnight were fairly widespread, although not in too many areas. Rostov region is under massive drone attack, said Max 25 last night, and many explosions have been recorded in the region. We don't have, although there are plenty of videos, indicating audially or visually lots of explosions. Massive drone attack underway in Bataysk in the Rostov region. Russian air defenses attempted to intercept, but one of their missiles reportedly struck a residential building. Not for the first time. That seems to happen quite a lot, often with Pantsir air defense systems. So that was Rostov, and there's more imagery here. Moment of a strike in Rostov region at night. So a fairly large explosion there. Don't know what it is, what was hit. And then I find this pretty revealing. So this is a guy in Rostov filming the hits. So he's obviously not happy, but he's also not happy about them not striking the Kremlin or Moscow. He's like down in Rostov, and he's like, quote, "The Kremlin isn't here, guys. You got the wrong coordinates. Strike the Kremlin." Furious Rostov locals, fed up with the fallout of the special military operation, are now turning their anger toward Putin. Bataysk saw heavy destruction last night, intensifying public outrage. This is kind of what you want, which is civilians recognizing that the war, A, this is what you do to Ukraine, and you've been doing that to Ukraine for almost 4 years. B, when they do it back, how do you feel? Pretty angry? Right, take that anger out on the person who started this war. That'll be Putin. Go on, go and have a whinge. Go and get out on the street, write some letters. Now, we look at another major Russian oil refinery has been shut down due to a drone strike. This one, was it 3 nights ago? Novokubishevsk refinery, which is not the first time that's been hit either. But that was, the 19th. So that's 2 nights, but it could have been the night after midnight in the morning. So it was 3 nights ago, I think it was. Another major oil refinery has shut, and that's a big one there. That will hurt the Russian economy. And then a blaze has reignited at an oil depot in Russian-occupied Crimea, according to media reporting there. Ukrainian drones were spotted in the area. A fire at the Atan oil depot in the village of Hraditska, located in Russian-occupied Crimea, reignited with increased intensity, the Crimean wind channel reported today. So it could be a return journey for a drone there. And talking about journeys of these drones, I reported these are Foxbat A-22 planes that were being turned into drones that could drop both these larger bombs together with a couple of smaller, what looked like mortar bombs. And there you can see it under the carriage there. Well, actually, I got the wrong aircraft. Apparently, these are E-300 Gorinich long-range strike drones. The unit that launches them has vast experience of deep strikes up to 3,000 kilometers inside Russia. It targets Russian oil, energy and military sites. Operators prepare and launch E-300 Gorinich long-range strike drones. So the E-300 is capable of carrying up to 300 kilograms of payload, can fly up to 23 hours, mostly using Soviet-era aerial bombs and mines fitted to hardpoints. The unit has completed 78 successful missions already at an estimated cost of $50,000 per unit. The estimated damage to Russia is about $3 to $5 billion. So the return on investment for these is pretty high, and they are not the most expensive of drones either. Fairly simple tech, probably, with some pretty old munitions, but those munitions can still do an awful lot of damage. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces here. Sorry, I told you there's lots to go through. Right, Russia quotes, this is from the Moscow Times. The situation is dire. 6 Russian regions have spent almost all their reserves and are on the brink of budget collapse. Wow. Okay, so watch this space. We keep talking about it, and it feels to me like the screws are tightening more and more. Something is going to explode soon. The pressure is mounting on the Russian economy. Russia faces, and this is according to the Kyiv Independent, $100 billion of deficit in 2026, according to Zelensky. Ukraine expects Russia to face a nearly $100 billion budget deficit by next year. Zelensky said on the 19th, underscoring Moscow's growing economic challenges amid the war. Okay, so loads of canaries in coal mines are dying at the moment. Now, I am going to read you a long thread here, but one that I think is very important. I don't particularly understand this stuff too much, but I'm going to hope that you do. This is from Branislav Slantchev, talking about Russia's surprisingly resilient war economy is nothing of the sort. Okay, so a really in-depth analysis of Russia's war economy. I hope you're fine with me reading this. Russia's war expenditures for 2024 are estimated to be $149 billion in current US dollars and exchange rates, or 7.1% of its GDP, 19% of its total government spending. SIPRI notes that the Russian budget has become, quote, increasingly opaque, with 30% marked as classified in 2024, meaning that the spending is likely higher than the estimate. Most of what spending went to the arms industry to buy weapons and to subsidize some producers who are on the verge of bankruptcy. About $9.4 billion to October went to social support for military personnel, nearly double the budgeted amount. In other words, Russia spends at least 6% of its military budget on personnel. Russia's federal budget deficit was 1.7% of GDP and was financed by domestic borrowing, oil and gas revenues, and drawing on the National Wealth Fund. Russia's debt to GDP is about 15%, one of the lowest in the world. With high interest rates, key rate is currently at 17%, down from 21%. The cost of servicing this debt will be 8% of the budget, compared to Britain's 8.3% spend on debt service, despite carrying 96% debt to GDP. Ukraine's are $64.7 billion, or 34% of GDP, and 54% of total government spending. So it seems like Ukraine is spending a lot more on the war than Russia, relative to its GDP and government expenditure as a whole. Ukraine spent all of its tax revenues on the military, and all non-military spending was funded by foreign aid. In 2024, Ukraine received $60 billion in financial military aid. When this amount is factored in, Ukraine's war spending is $125 billion. Ukraine spends about 3/4 of it of its military budget on personnel. Wow. So Ukraine's budget deficit in 2024 was 17.7% of GDP, lower than the planned 24.2%, and was financed through international aid, loans, and domestic bonds. So the thing about Ukraine is it's getting an awful lot of actual monetary help and military help, obviously, from outside its borders, whereas Russia isn't. And there's no, I have no confidence that they are giving us accurate numbers. But anyway, its key interest rate is 50. Oh, so let's go back. Ukraine's debt to GDP ratio was 109%. In other words, they've got more debt than the money, than the product of their economy in a given year. An all-time high. Its key interest rate is 15.5%, slightly up from the 13% at the start of the year, but below the 25% that it hit in the summer of 2022. Its debt service will absorb about 8 to 10% of the budget, depending on grants. Comparing these data seems to suggest that Russia is doing considerably better with its war economy than Ukraine, which of course is heavily dependent on foreign assistance. What magic is Nabiullina, so she's in charge of the Russian central bank, is she using to sustain the Kremlin's war effort and keep the economy in a decent shape despite massive sanctions? Wow. There's no magic, there's just hidden war finance. So here's the crux. Russia is simply keeping an astonishing amount of military finance between $210 and $250 billion off the official books. In mid-2022, the Kremlin created a system of preferential loans whereby the government directs domestic banks to loan money to producers it deems important for the war at very low rates, so about 5 to 8%, or anywhere between 24 to and 47% of the key rate. Accounting for this spending, the loans become additional military costs, and debt doubles Russia's military expenditures to $297 billion, $148 billion annualized hidden, which would be 14% of GDP and 38% of the budget. The deficit would increase to 6% of GDP and require 4.5 times more borrowing. At 14% of GDP dedicated to military spending, Russia now approaches Soviet spending during the peak of the Afghan war, about 15% of the early 1980s. For comparison, the US peak military spending as percentage of GDP has been World War II, 37 to 42%, Korean War, 14%, Vietnam War, 9%, Gulf War, 5%, and GWOT, is that the War on Terror, 5.7%. How does it work? The war demand from the military is massive, and the defense industry is struggling to fulfill the orders despite working 3 shifts 24/7. Because the Kremlin wants to hide the true cost of the war, it does not allocate enough money to pay for all this production, the official budget expenditures, and so companies have to borrow, doing so at the very high interest rate that Nabiullina maintained to curb inflation, 21% peak, would have been ruinously expensive, and so the Kremlin stepped in to force the banks to loan at ridiculously low rates. These debts are backed up by the government. The banks forced to lend huge amounts to the defense industry have had to curtail their lending to other companies. The market rates then they have to use are too high, choking off credit for many small and medium enterprises and driving many into bankruptcy. There's been a lot of pressure on the Kremlin to do something about this, and Nabiullina finally relented by a bit by lowering the interest rate to 17%. This is still too high, however, so the Kremlin stepped in with a decree that declared a bank holiday for 6 months, allowing small and medium enterprises not to service their debts contracted since 2024. The domestic banks are thus now squeezed both by the unprofitable loans they have had to make to the defense industry and the non-performing loans they've made to the non-defense sector that they've been given, bank holidays for. And here's where it gets problematic. The defense sector's primary and often sole income source during the war are state contracts. Russia's delayed deliveries of weapons to foreign countries because of the immense needs at the front. As long as the war continues, these contracts will keep providing a steady cash flow, allowing the companies to service their debts. And so these loans will appear as performing on bank balance sheets. This creates the illusion of stability in the system and keeps the government budgets looking healthy. What happens if the war were to end, but the sanctions remained in place? The state contracts will dry up, so the companies will not be able to keep servicing the loans, which will trigger a banking crisis as suddenly significant assets turn into liabilities. It will not be easy to replace the state contracts with foreign sales in the short term, and the sanctions will block access to foreign capital markets. At 17% domestic interest rate, refinancing would not be viable. The only way out would be a massive government bailout that would recapitalise the banks, with corporate debt already exceeding oil and gas revenues, which are unlikely to increase given the tighter sanctions on the tanker fleet, India diversifying and OPEC increasing production. The only way to generate the revenue would be through various hikes in taxation and drastic cuts in social spending. The government's deficit will suddenly balloon to reflect the true cost of the war finance as it absorbs these liabilities. The shock to the Russian population will be severe. They will be hit with a banking crisis, higher taxes and cuts to social programs all at once, and they'll be massive as well. Without sanction relief, which does not appear to be forthcoming, the Kremlin is essentially gambling the entire Russian economy on Ukraine's resistance collapsing before its financial bubble bursts. Our strategy is clear: increase pressure on Russia by hitting their energy revenues while enabling Ukraine to attack its infrastructure and sustaining the Ukrainian economy. Russia cannot win this war if the West plays its very strong hand right. Absolutely 100%. This is basically, putting the meat on the bones to what I've been saying for ages. The Russian economy cannot sustain this war without massive, explicit help from outside its borders. So Ukraine needs the help of allies to hammer the Russian economy, hammer the way that they make money, hammer the shadow fleet, put sanctions onto the hilt. US needs to be involved in this, which they're not enough at the moment, but they could be. But the US seems to be capitulating to the Russian demands. But anyway, if everyone else stays strong and Ukraine keeps hitting deep into Russia and taking out its logistics and its ways of making money, then things will be very challenging for the Russians. Now, Steve Rosenberg, the BBC correspondent in Moscow, says from today's Russian papers, it doesn't sound like Russia's about to stop fighting in Ukraine. Today's edition of MK, quote, "For us, a cessation of hostilities is inadvisable. Plus, Russia's petrol shortage is now 20% of monthly supplies. And the fighting should stop immediately. The current line of contact should be the starting point of negotiations." This is a joint statement by European leaders and Zelensky. Statement by President Zelensky, Prime Minister Starmer, Chancellor Merz and President Macron, Prime Minister Meloni and Tusk, von der Leyen, Costa, Stubb and Frederiksen, on peace for Ukraine. We are all united in the desire for just and lasting peace deserved by the people of Ukraine. We strongly support President Trump's position that the fighting should stop immediately and the current line of contract should be the starting point of negotiations. We remain committed to the principle that the international borders must be not be changed by force. Russia's stalling tactics have shown time and time again that Ukraine is the only party serious about peace. We can all see that Putin continues to choose violence and destruction. Therefore, we are clear that Ukraine must be in the strongest possible position before, during and after any ceasefire. We must ramp up the pressure on Russia's economy and its defense industry until Putin is ready to make peace. We are developing measures to use the full value of Russia's immobilized sovereign assets so that Ukraine has the resources it needs. By the way, the US is putting a halt on the G7 doing this. So the US is doing everything it can to help Russia at the moment. Leaders will meet later this week in the European Council and in the Coalition of Willing format to discuss how this work forward and to further support Ukraine. Now, someone else below says awful and weak. If Ukraine stops to attacking, Russia will do worse next time, blah, blah, blah. And there is a really good case for that. But there's also a case that this could be quite clever because it's showing to the US once again that actually Ukraine are willing to do that ceasefire they're talking about and freeze the front lines, because Russia's just come out and said that they are not willing to negotiate until the root causes are sorted. So again, it shows that Ukraine is willing to do this and Russia isn't. Also, I think you could get an inference. I think I could infer from this that Ukraine really are in desperate situations with regard to Russian strikes, both in the amount of reserves they've got and the will they've got to keep on fighting. This could suggest that Ukraine is in a very fragile position, that they're willing to do this. But it's also interesting that the Russians don't appear to be willing to do this. Now, if the US if Trump meets with Putin and there's still nothing comes from this, Europe just have to, I was lying in bed the other night just thinking, right, I think the UK and France just need to be really ballsy now and just put their Eurofighters in the western Ukraine and have a no-fly zone. Just say, sod it, we're going to do it, and what's Russia going to do? And then start really pushing allies into being much stronger. Get some air defences in western Ukraine, saying we're going to protect civilians and industry in western Ukraine. You know, we're not attacking the Russians, but if the Russians are going to send their missiles all the way over to the other side of Ukraine to blow people up over here, we're going to protect them, and we're going to put our planes in the sky. What are you going to do about it? Because you've been using North Korean troops and no one's done this. No one's done anything. Square root of naff all has been done to that. So we need to be ballsy. And I'm hoping that this is kind of last chance saloon for Trump to actually fricking do something. And if he doesn't, everyone just goes, right, feck off, Trump. I'm just, honestly, you are useless. You are an asset of the Russian Federation here. It is clear that you're doing everything you can to appease Russia. Just sod off. Here's your last chance. I'm hoping this is last chance saloon. Right. And I'm going to leave you on a positive. I know it's been a really long one today. I said it was going to be, but let's be positive. This made me cry when I read it yesterday. Lada Gaga went to, and many of you were giving me a little anecdotes of your experiences from going to the No Kings rally. So many of you in the US, many of my US viewers did turn up to No Kings rallies wherever they were, protest marches around, peaceful protest marches around the US. Here is one that is relevant to Ukraine, and I'm going to read it to you. This is from Lada Gaga. So Lada Gaga, thank you so much for being a great supporter, by the way, so consistently, by the way. I have to say that. Thanks for this, JP. I've never protested a day in my life until June No Kings, so the previous one. Saturday's No Kings was epic. I made quite a few new friends too. There was a huge Ukrainian flag flying in the crowd, about 10 foot tall on a pole, carried by an elderly gentleman. It was a pretty big crowd, but I was determined to make my way to him. On the way, I came across a guy with a Stand with Ukraine t-shirt. I decided to have a chat with him. My wife eye-rolled me because that's what she does. Me and my new friend discussed tomahawks, the different channels we get our Ukraine news from, and the unbreakable spirit of the Ukrainian people. I shared ATP Geopolitics with him. Thank you. So maybe we might have another supporter here. Turns out he lives just down the street from me. I finally made my way to the elderly gentleman with a huge Ukrainian flag. My wife eye-rolled me again, because that's what she does. I approached him and thanked him for flying the flag and commented that it must be getting heavy. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "It is so much lighter now." Apparently, a Ukrainian soldier, current, former, disabled, don't know, was in the crowd and hugged this gentleman and asked if he could lower the flag. The soldier wept as he kneeled and kissed the flag. The soldier then hugged the man and thanked him once again and left. Tears flowed from this elderly gentleman and his wife as he relayed the story to me. I thanked him once again and made my way to my wife with tears in my own eyes. I told her the story of the Ukrainian soldier and she gave me a hug as we both wept. It was a great day Saturday. My wife was also such a hero at No Kings. She broke her foot last week and is in a walking boot and gets around on a knee scooter. She uncomfortably scooted a mile each direction to and from the rally. It was a good day, and I'm a lucky man. Wonderful anecdote. Thank you for sharing that with us, with me. I hope you don't mind me reading that to the audience. It suggests support for Ukraine still exists out there in the midst of political protest in somewhere in the United States, and that is fantastic. I'm so glad that you met with people and found common ground over Ukraine and your support for Ukraine. And thank you for your wife for supporting you. Mate, my partner rolls her eyes frequently, so I'm with you there. So, but she's there supporting you and supporting Ukraine in her own way, and allowing you to watch so much of my content. So that is incredible. So you're a lucky man there. So well done. Anyway, thanks to all out there. Take care of yourselves and keep talking Ukraine. Keep talking about it at the water cooler, at the family dinner, online. It's so important. Slava Ukraini.